It's a cold winter morning, and you wake up to find snow covering your driveway, which means a few things. One, you're probably going to be late for work. Two, your car is basically an ice sculpture now. And three, you're going to spend the next 20 minutes scraping frost off your windshield while questioning all your life choices. But hey, at least winter only lasts a few months, right? You can tough it out. But what if winter didn't end? What if spring just never came? And let's say this keeps going for not just years, but for 2.6 million years of nothing but ice cold and more ice. Well, at that point, I doubt you'd still be complaining about your driveway. And if you were, I'd tell you to bundle up, because 2.6 million years of winter is exactly what our planet went through. And honestly, we're technically still in it. This was the Quaternary glaciation. And yeah, it's wild. This prolonged deep freeze kicked off during the Quaternary period, which, if you're keeping track, is the geological period we're currently living in. But more specifically, the Ice Age started around 2.58 million years ago, right at the beginning of the Pleistocene epoch. And before this icy nightmare began, Earth was actually doing pretty well for itself in the Pliocene epoch. Temperatures were warmer, which might not sound like much, but trust me, it made a difference. The Arctic barely had any ice. Forests stretched way further north than they do now. Sea levels were higher, sometimes by as much as 25 meters or 82 feet, which would have put a lot of our current coastal cities underwater. So, not great if you lived in what would one day be Miami. And the continents at this point were pretty much where they are today. Panya had long since broken up, and the land masses had drifted into their modern configurations. North and South America had recently connected via the Isthmus of Panama around 3 million years ago, which, by the way, was kind of a big deal. This land bridge didn't just allow animals to migrate between continents, it also completely altered ocean currents, which would turn out to be pretty relevant to our story. Because when you mess with ocean currents, you mess with global climate. And messing with global climate is basically asking for trouble. In terms of life, things were honestly thriving. Mammals had been having their moment for tens of millions of years now, and the Pliocene was no exception. You had early elephants, camels, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and all sorts of megafauna just doing their thing. And actually, this was also around the time our own ancestors were starting to make some noise in Africa. Early hominins like Australopithecus were walking around on two legs, probably not realizing that their descendants would one day be dealing with, you guessed it, an ice age. So what exactly kicked off this 2.6 million year winter? Well, as it turns out, it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm, or rather a perfect freeze, of multiple factors coming together in just the wrong way. Or the right way, depending on how you feel about ice. First up, we've got those continental positions I mentioned. When North and South America connected, it shut down a crucial ocean current that had been flowing between the Atlantic and Pacific. This rerouted warm water northward via the Gulf Stream, which sounds nice, but it actually pumped more moisture into the northern regions. And more moisture in cold areas means more snow, and more snow means more ice. And more ice means, well, you get the idea. It's a snowball effect, literally. Then there's the Tibetan Plateau in the Himalayas, which had been steadily rising for millions of years thanks to India rudely crashing into Asia. And these mountains, we're not messing around. They're tall, really tall. And when you have massive mountain ranges like this, they influence atmospheric circulation patterns, which in turn affects monsoons and rainfall distribution. Plus, all that exposed rock meant increased weathering, which pulled CO2 out of the atmosphere over time. And less CO2? Well, that means less greenhouse warming, which means cooler temperatures globally. Oh, and let's not forget about Earth's orbital cycles, commonly known as Milankovitch cycles. These are basically wobbles and shifts in Earth's orbit and axial tilt that happen over tens of thousands of years. And these cycles affect how much solar radiation different parts of the planet receive during different seasons. When these cycles align in just the right way, or wrong way again, depending on your perspective, you get conditions that favor ice sheet growth. And once ice sheets start forming, they reflect more sunlight back into space, which cools things down even more. It's like Earth's way of saying, you know what? Let's just commit to this ice thing. So when you combine ocean current changes, mountain building, dropping CO2 levels, and orbital mechanics all happening at once, you get the recipe for a planetary-scale deep freeze. And around 2.58 million years ago, that recipe was complete. The Quaternary glaciation had officially begun. Now, when I say ice age, you might be picturing the entire planet covered in a frozen wasteland, like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. But that's not quite how it worked. Instead, the Quaternary glaciation was characterized by something a bit more complicated: glacial and interglacial periods. In other words, it wasn't just constant ice for 2.6 million years. It was more like Earth was having mood swings between extremely cold and less cold, but still pretty chilly. During the glacial periods, which were the really intense phases, massive ice sheets spread across the northern continents. We're talking ice sheets that were kilometers thick, covering huge portions of North America, Europe, and Asia. The Laurentide ice sheet, for instance, blanketed most of Canada and parts of the northern United States, stretching from the Arctic all the way down to what's now New York and the Great Lakes region. And if you time traveled back to glacial maximum, you'd find Chicago buried under about a mile of solid ice. Yeah, a mile. Over in Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet covered Scandinavia, much of the British Isles, and extended into northern Germany and Russia. And these ice sheets weren't just sitting there looking pretty, they were actively carving up the landscape, gouging out valleys, scraping bedrock, and basically redesigning entire continents. Lakes like the Great Lakes, Ice Age creation, the fjords of Norway, also Ice Age handiwork. So, thanks Ice Age for the scenic views, I guess. And the ice wasn't just limited to land. Sea ice expanded dramatically, and sea levels dropped by as much as 120 meters, or about 394 feet, during the coldest periods because so much water was locked up in those massive ice sheets. This exposed land bridges that don't exist today, like the Bering Land Bridge between Asia and North America, which, by the way, is how humans eventually made it to the Americas. So, silver lining? But here's the thing, these glacial periods didn't last forever. Every 40,000 to 100,000 years, depending on when you're talking about, the ice would retreat during what are called interglacial periods. Temperatures would warm up a bit, ice sheets would melt back, sea levels would rise, and for a while things would be relatively calm. But then the cycle would repeat, ice would advance again, temperatures would plummet, and Earth would go back into deep freeze mode. And this has happened over and over and over again for the past 2.6 million years. In fact, we're currently in an interglacial period called the Holocene, which started about 11,700 years ago. So technically, the Quaternary glaciation isn't over. We're just in a warm phase, which, depending on how you look at it, is either comforting or mildly terrifying. Now you might be thinking, okay, so it got cold. Big deal. Life adapts, right? And sure, life does adapt. But here's the thing, this wasn't just a little cold snap. This was 2.6 million years of on-again, off-again glaciation. And that kind of environmental yo-yoing is brutal for ecosystems. So while the Quaternary glaciation wasn't a single catastrophic extinction event, like, say, the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, it absolutely caused a lot of casualties over time. One of the hardest hit groups? The megafauna. And by megafauna, I mean the big boys. The giant mammals that had been dominating terrestrial ecosystems. We're talking about animals like mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, woolly rhinos, cave bears, giant beavers the size of bears, and so many more. And many of these animals did reasonably well during the Ice Age for a while, actually. Some even thrived. Woolly mammoths, for instance, were perfectly adapted to cold environments with their thick fur and fat reserves. But as the Ice Age progressed and the climate kept fluctuating, things got tougher. The problem wasn't just the cold, it was the instability. Habitats would expand and contract. Food sources would shift or disappear. And on top of all that, you had a new apex predator showing up on the scene: humans. Yep. Homo sapiens spread across the globe during the late Pleistocene, and we were pretty good at hunting. And while there's still debate about how much of the megafaunal extinction was due to climate change versus human hunting, most scientists agree it was probably a combination of both. A 1-2 punch, if you will, and the extinctions were staggering. In North America alone, we lost around 70% of large mammal species. In South America, it was even worse, around 80%. Australia lost most of its megafauna too, including giant kangaroos and massive monitor lizards. Europe and Asia saw declines as well, though not quite as severe. But still, the impact was massive. Entire ecosystems were restructured, food webs collapsed and reformed, and the landscapes that had been shaped by these large herbivores through grazing, trampling, and general disturbance changed fundamentally. So yeah, the Ice Age was not kind to big animals. And honestly, it's kind of tragic because a lot of these species have been around for millions of years, surviving all sorts of previous climate changes. But the Quaternary glaciation combined with human expansion was just too much. But with that said, what's interesting about the Quaternary glaciation is that while it caused a lot of extinctions, it also drove a ton of evolutionary innovation and adaptation. Because when the environment gets harsh, life doesn't just give up, it gets creative. Take mammals, for instance. Many species developed incredible cold weather adaptations: thick fur, compact body shapes to reduce heat loss, fat reserves, and even behavioral changes like hibernation became more common. The woolly mammoth is the poster child for Ice Age adaptations, but they weren't alone. Musk oxen, reindeer, Arctic foxes, and countless other species evolved specifically to handle the cold. And some of these adaptations are still around today, which is pretty cool, literally. And it wasn't just mammals. Birds adapted too, with many species developing migratory patterns to escape the worst of the glacial conditions. Plants shifted their ranges, with cold-tolerant species like conifers and tundra vegetation becoming dominant in the northern regions, while temperate and tropical species retreated south. And this constant shuffling of plant communities created entirely new biomes and ecosystems that had never existed before. But perhaps the most significant change involved, well, us, humans. The Quaternary glaciation essentially shaped human evolution in ways that are hard to overstate. Our ancestors had to deal with fluctuating climates, changing food sources, and competition with other hominin species like Neanderthals and Denisovans. And this pressure likely drove the development of bigger brains, better tools, more complex social structures, and advanced problem-solving skills. In other words, the Ice Age didn't just happen to us, it made us who we are. And actually, it's kind of poetic. The same Ice Age that wiped out so many megafauna species also created the conditions that allowed humans to become the dominant species on the planet, which, depending on how you look at it, is either a triumph of evolution or a cosmic joke. So that brings us to the big question: what happens now? Are we still in an Ice Age? Will the glaciers come back? Or are we done with all this? Well, as I mentioned earlier, technically we're still in the Quaternary glaciation. We're just in an interglacial period. And based on past patterns, if things were left to natural cycles, we'd probably be due for another glacial advance in, 10,000 to 50,000 years or so. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets complicated. Humans have kind of thrown a wrench into the natural climate system. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've been pumping CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at rates that are, not natural. And this has caused global temperatures to rise significantly, which is why you keep hearing about climate change and global warming. And while the long-term natural trend might have been toward another glacial period eventually, our current trajectory is actually pushing things in the opposite direction. We're warming the planet so much that some scientists think we might have actually delayed or even prevented the next glacial advance altogether, which, might sound like good news if you're not a fan of mile-thick ice sheets. But the rapid warming we're experiencing now comes with its own set of problems: rising sea levels, extreme weather events, habitat loss, and ecosystem disruption. So we've basically traded one climate extreme for another. Fantastic. But regardless of what happens in the future, the Quaternary glaciation has left a permanent mark on our planet. The landscapes we see today, the valleys, lakes, coastlines, and mountain ranges, were shaped by ice. The animals and plants that survived are the ones that adapted to extreme cold. And humanity itself owes its existence, at least in part, to the challenges posed by this 2.6 million year winter. So the next time you're scraping ice off your windshield on a cold winter morning, I want you to remember this video and appreciate the fact that you're only dealing with a few months of cold, not 2.6 million years. And maybe, just maybe, thank the Ice Age for making us who we are today, even if it did also make us lose some really cool giant sloths in the process. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Primeval Zoo.